Hello, everybody. We are back again, and we are here with Ellie. We're going to talk about some of the executive orders. But before we get started, I wanted to call out to people who are ready to act, not people who are considering or thinking about it. I'm talking about people who want to get started on taking action to defeat this fascist movement. We've got an organization that we got started called the Opposition, and you're going to have an opportunity to join this as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about that later on, but I wanted to let you know about it up front. And with that, we're going to turn to Ellie, who's going to educate us about all the terrible things that Trump and the MAGAs are trying to do to us. So go ahead, Ellie.
And really an effort to test executive power. I think people are paying a little bit too much attention to the substance of things like the plastic straws, and not enough to, you know, orders about curriculum for K-12 education when that's been settled by the Supreme Court about a half a dozen times that the executive branch and the federal government does not have any input into K through 12 education curriculum. Um, and so, like, most of these executive orders are really focusing on testing how far he can take executive power, and how far people are going to be willing to listen to him. So, yeah, and you add that to just a propaganda campaign that's happening right now from Elon Musk and sort of the henchmen and fake accounts that perpetuate things he says. We I think we've really reached 100% saturation where everything they're talking about is a lie, and I think it's really hard for people to get their bearing with what that looks like.
No, I agree. They are. I mean, that's one of the things I warned people about when we first got started is that they're going to delete all the data out there that is meaningful,
Yeah.
and they're going to replace it with a bunch of propaganda. So I went and captured a lot of stuff that was meaningful to me. So I hope people got stuff that was meaningful for them as well, because we can't trust anything coming from these liars at all.
Yeah.
So did you want to cover the Department of Education first, or do you want to dig into USAID? What did you want to do?
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about the Department of Education, and specifically, even I think it was yesterday, um, they came out with another executive order, and canceled all of the contracts for the Educational Statistical Agency that has been capturing U.S. education statistics since 1867. So anytime you even want to have a conversation about education in the United States, if you want to talk about how much money is spent on Title One for low income schools, if you want to talk about how much money is spent on special education, the only reason you can even have that conversation is because of the National Center for Education Statistics. And as much as they're talking about going after the Department of Ed, what they did yesterday was cancel all National Center of Education statistics. So that is everything from funding to test scores. It's, how many books are in your library. It's how many kids are low income. It's demographic information, and it's even information on private schooling and homeschooling. I really say, like, even if you want to complain about K through 12 public education, you're still relying on this statistical information that they're now getting rid of. Even if you want to say, hey, our test scores, post COVID are lower, well, duh. You still, like, you need the National Center for Education Statistics even to tell you that. And so I don't think people realize the significance of losing this data and this information. Um,
But that's
I,
a strategy they have across the board. They delete the
yeah.
data so that you don't have a baseline to where anything they tell you at that point now is just their lies that they're trying to spread out there, which is the
Well,
concern.
and it's so sad. I mean, for me personally, I I fell in love with statistics reading these 1910, 1920, 1940 digests of education statistics in the US. Like, we have just the littlest minutia of data, like, on such small little details, and it's fascinating, and people were doing this work, compiling all of this without computers for so long, and a lot of those copies are archived, they're in libraries, but the idea that we would lose this system where we have tracked this for years, and truly, we would be the only developed country that is not performing these educational statistics, like, they're in fact, really the only country. Every single country in the world is looking at what are your test scores, how much are you spending, and the idea that they would get rid of that is such an absurdity.
Not unless if it's part of their plan, it's not an absurdity. It's just part of their plan, and
Yeah.
I believe that. So I went through some of the statistics and data that I had and resources that I had to go over through some of what we consider the 45 worst and most impactful cuts if they eliminate the Department of Education. So maybe we can
Mhm.
cover a couple of those. I have them grouped by the different areas. So if you look at under funding and financial impacts, loss of Title I funding would be
Yeah.
huge against low income students, right?
Yeah.
Elimination of Pell Grants. Why?
Yep.
Why would they get rid of something that helps, your low income, middle income families get into college? And I have an answer for that. Well, I'm going to give you a little teaser about it now is that they've got these state run colleges that they want to pose that are free where you can get straight propaganda at no cost. So I think that's partly the reason they make it more difficult to go to a real university,
Mm.
but that's just my assumption. But it sort of falls in line with all the other stuff they're doing.
Yeah.
And the privatization of student loans, they want to make sure that if you get a student loan, that you have no ability to get out of it with some kind of Joe Biden student loan forgiveness kind of program. That's
Well,
not
and
good for people.
I'm happy to talk about that one too because, I mean, public service loan forgiveness was the terms of the loan I signed. Like, I went to school and most of mine are paid off now, but when I went to school, I signed a thing taking out these loans when I was 18 years old, knowing what I was gonna go into, knowing I was going to go into the nonprofit world, and knowing, like, okay, social work doesn't pay a lot of money. And so I took out these loans with the knowledge that I would work for 10 years, I would make income-based payments, and then the rest of the loan would be forgiven because I was gonna be providing a public service throughout my life. And that's what Project 2025 wants to end. Like, they wanna rescind the terms of the loan that we already signed up for. And yeah, I mean, and privatization of it is in Project 2025, like, they believe that should be entirely private market.
Yes, and then they can control the forgiveness. And now that they got rid of the CFPB, there's going to be no protections for the kinds of loans and rates and all the kind of stuff that
Yeah,
you could possibly be taken advantage of. So there's just a concentrated effort in so many different ways.
yeah,
So cuts to special education funding, people don't really think about that. So I saw a video of a district in Oklahoma, Kentucky, someplace that's a red
mhm,
state, saying that, oh my gosh, I can't believe Trump's going to cut Department of Education. Well, he said he was going to do it, and they're like, we get
yeah,
60% of our money from Title One. Hello,
yeah,
we tried to tell you.
yeah. I mean, and I broke that down the other day too at the state level, and you can break it down by district. At the state level, Mississippi, Louisiana, Georgia, they're getting 16, 17% of their education budget for the state from Title I and special education money. And if you break that down at the district level, exactly, some of those schools are getting 60, 70% of their money from these funding sources. And those states don't have the tax revenue to make up for it. Connecticut, Washington, California, Oregon, they're paying in a lot more than they're getting out from the federal government for K-12 education,
Mhm.
but those red states are gonna be in trouble.
And I think that, like, again, I hate to be a pessimist, but I think that's part of their strategy. They want an uneducated
Absolutely.
mass that they can be forced to get these jobs at low cost with pregnant and with no labor, right to work kind of laws in those states. I think that's part of their plan.
Yeah,
I don't have any
absolutely.
I don't give them any benefit of the doubt. But I just think that, and we can talk about this on another day, but I think there's opportunity as we educate people about how this is really going to affect them in their own personal pockets. Because Republicans, conservatives tend to only care about things when it affects them personally.
Yeah.
So partly, I think that given this kind of material that we're presenting here, this gives people ammunition to go back to their MAGA friends, MAGA family, if they're
Yeah.
so inclined, or people that they're just talking it into at the Starbucks to talk loudly about how the fact there's going to be an end of the school lunch program. That's going to
Yeah.
affect people, right?
That's yeah, I mean, gosh, so much of our economy too is like built on consumer spending. Like so much of our economy is like, do you have the money to buy your kids that toy? Do you have the money to buy another car and take out a loan and pay money on that loan? Like that's so much of our economy. And people are not going to have that anymore. You know, if you're taking away school lunch programs, if you're taking away gosh, special education, we can get into that later, but I mean, the we don't have we don't have a functional medical system. So part of the reason for K through 12 education being expensive is because those special education dollars and those services are paying for kids to have physical therapists. They're paying for kids to have speech therapists and occupational therapists at school. And when you take those away, either the kids just don't get that service anymore or they need to get it in a private market, and that costs families so much money, and I don't think people are realizing that. You know, you can be a Trump supporter in a deep red area, and if your kid, nobody can understand them by the first grade, the school is going to put them in speech therapy, and that's going to work for you. And most people have no idea what that costs in the private market.
Right. And it's not cheap. And then
No.
you have some kids who have even more serious needs than that are
Yeah.
being covered. That are, and part of what they have as part of the Project 2025 is the block grant idea, where they give you, let's say, $100,000 is what the state of California gets for all of its students, and then if they get more students, they get 125,000. It goes up based on your need. But with block grants, they're going to give you a per dollar per child amount. So as your need increases, you're going to have less per child, and it has less restrictions, so that for states who are struggling with finances, they might be able to tap into that special education money to pay for some programs that are more favored. So now you're going to have the per child loss that's part of the block grant concept, and then you're going to have the additional, what are the Hunger Games competition between other people who are looking for access to that money. That is
Yeah.
the worst thing that could happen, but that's one of the proposals within the Project 2025 is those block grants.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. Mass school closures. We can already see that happening in Florida and Arizona, where these voucher programs are really taking off.
Yeah.
They are closing schools because people who, are going to these voucher schools, these private schools, these charter schools, with the public money, which is leaving the public schools with less money, and it's just going to
Yep.
further exacerbate, right?
Well, and that's, I mean, that's what you're seeing too. And like every single study that has been done on these private school vouchers shows that in the first few years of those programs, those kids were already going to private school. Like Florida did not see any additional kids going to private school. They just started paying the private school tuition for these already wealthy families.
And which leaves less money for those behind,
Yeah. And their test scores are tanking.
right? Again, they don't want an educated population.
Yeah.
They want a compliant one. So, um, increased college tuition, expansive for profit and scam colleges. Again, with some of the lack of oversight that they're pushing in all these other agencies, that's going to be even more significant. And as you
Yeah.
just talked about, the voucher program favoring wealthy families, I mean, study after study shows that's true. All you're doing
Yep.
is taking money that those people were paying personally because they could afford it and giving them public funds to take away from public. And then you go and say, the public schools don't work. Really?
You defunded them. Yeah.
Oh, the one that caught my attention was the no federal disaster relief for schools. So imagine being in a poor state like a West Virginia or an Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, right, and having a major
Yeah.
catastrophe hit, and there's no FEMA around, there's no federal disaster relief around. Those schools are just going to be cesspools of disaster and no ability to rebuild. What are they thinking?
That and it's crazy because all of these things they keep saying, well, we're going to give the states more rights, we're going to give the states more responsibilities, but they're not going to give these tax dollars back to the states.
Heck
I
no.
mean, I'm already seeing that, and it's crazy. It's crazy to see it from Musk and from kind of the sycophants and influencers for him, because every single one of them is already saying, what are we going to do with these savings? What are we going to do with these savings from getting rid of the Department of Ed? What are we going to do with these savings from getting rid of the Consumer Finance Bureau? Like, I thought you were doing this so we could pay down the debt. I thought the debt was the important thing. But, even the financial management of these billionaires is so poor that they they've lost the plot and really revealed taken the masks off and revealed what it was all about, which was just removing these services from people because they're already saying, where are we going to put this money that we've saved? Like, no, you keep saying we're in this catastrophic amount of debt. That's where that money needs to go. And they're already, it's just, it's the guy with the dollar burning the hole in his pocket. What else can we pay for as we're cutting
Vital services.
HIV medication? Yeah. Ugh.
So, and then moving to the civil rights discrimination. So, with the Department of Education being closed, shuttered, there will be a lot of these rollbacks and protections for LGBTQ plus communities, for Black, Hispanic communities, for people with disabilities. So, just imagine now you can openly discriminate against these marginalized communities and have no recourse because there's no federal agency that's enforcing that. There's no restrictions to not be able to do it. I mean, private schools, the charter schools were already discriminating against the students they
Hmm.
allowed in. Now this is going to allow them to do it openly.
Yeah. I also, as I was pulling that data, and maybe that's why they want to pull it down, I was pulling education funding data, and the schools with the highest percent federal funding tend to be charter schools. And it's really strange how that works and what strings they're able to pull to get that money. But it's like, these these are more expensive per student than any other school.
Interesting. I just I just wish I could understand what their nefarious motives are. If we can figure out how can we think as terrible as possible, and then we'd probably be coming up with what they were actually trying to plan to do.
I mean, I they they don't want to pay their taxes, and I think it's on some levels as simple as that. I think a lot of them simply do not know how this works, and I think that's a problem with Twitter discourse too. Somebody was saying the other day, like, man, the Biden administration failed. Like, I didn't know until today that they increased increased food stamps 30%. Like, that was the largest food stamp increase we've had in like 20 years, and so they increased the value 20-30% for a lot of families, and they were saying how bad it was that they didn't know about it. Well, your news coming from Twitter, there's not a lot of moms on food stamps on Twitter. Like, if you worked in K-12 education, you knew this. If you were on Instagram or you read a mommy blog, you knew this. But yeah, Twitter is, mostly 20 to 30-year-old dudes following Elon, not people with families. If they are, they're not people who pay attention to their families, and they didn't know.
Well, that's another discussion. But if I were in charge of the Biden administration, I would have designated a minister of truth telling. And his sole job is to go pat yourself on the back about everything you did. We did not do a good job of taking
And they
care.
did that though, like, gosh, so I nobody believes me when I say this. My 2-year-old wakes up in the middle of the night, and, my husband and I are pretty involved in all this, and so she's seen the news before, and if she wakes up at night, she wants to watch Joe Biden, and she asks to watch Joe Biden. And so,
Cute.
throughout the last 9 months, she would wake up at night and ask for Joe Biden, and I would go on the White House website, and I would play whatever remarks he'd given most recently, and that probably did make me more informed, but it's like, I it I every single one of those stories that the White House did, I could find a news organization covering it, but he wasn't on fire, and the media wants to cover the man on fire. They wanna cover the drama, and they just repost it over and over, and honestly, most of them don't understand the nuances, and significance of families getting 30% more food stamps. Like they don't get what that means for people. And part of that's a death of independent journalism, part of that's they're just reposting the stories, but like at what point are people just responsible for not knowing things? Because I can find CNN, NPR, even Fox talking about, oh, there was, additional food aid that was sent out. And and the administration repeating that, and the administration sending out press releases, and the administration doing photo ops with families going, look, they can buy more food. And and the zone was just so flooded by Trump craziness, nobody saw it. Like that, what you're asking for happened. Like they did have people going out and patting themselves on the back. And I I don't know what more could have been done to combat this multi-billion dollar misinformation campaign that is drowning people.
Well, I would say, and I agree that they did say it, and it wasn't being amplified. But what I meant by is someone whose sole job is to get together with their messaging teams to go
Yeah.
forth everywhere on the same accord to all the programs, including right wing media, get on the local channels, get everywhere, and tout your own horn every
Yeah.
day. They didn't do
Yeah.
that. They did not do that. But whereas Fox News and right wing media, they spend an inordinate amount of time getting their people ready to go spread lies.
Yeah.
They do that, and they're all in the same message, and they all do it, and they give you little sound bites. So even the people in your own Facebook groups or Twitter groups, they're out here spewing the same lies that the head honchos are doing. So
Yeah.
that's what I mean by that whole thing. We're in a different game, right? The
Yeah.
the day of say something once and it gets out to people, that is over. We need people who are dedicated, because how else, Ellie, can we have had people believing that the economy was terrible, right? Because right-wing media has been saying it every day for the last 5 years.
Well, and they've been saying it for the last 50. I mean, they are operating from a a structure of misinformation that has been built up for
Right.
50 years. So I hear what you're saying. The Democrats need to do better. And also, it, this is extremely well funded and well
Yes.
organized to just lie to people. And I think before it was actually harder because a lot of these lies were kind of rooted in something that was true or these free market principles or low, small government stuff. And now they're just entirely lies. And yeah.
And the media is afraid to call them out because they won't come back for their show.
Yeah,
Which
exactly.
that's another story. So let's move on so we can stay to our hour
Yeah.
timeline. So curriculum, education quality, the patriarch education mandates, where they're going to
That's
mandate that.
already the law.
Well, I'm talking about that 70. Remember after Nicole Hannah Jones, I think her name was, did the 1619 project, that Trump
Yeah.
came out immediately with the 1776 thing, where they're going to
Yeah.
say, no, no, what she said is all lies. Really, everything started here and blah, 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 blah. So they want to do that again on a national scale
Yeah.
to create these
Well,
little universities of
Let's
propaganda.
let's go back to talk about patriotic education in a minute here because I want to talk about the history of that
Okay,
and what the department has done.
sure.
Mm.
Uh,
And
you want me to go back to some particular place?
oh no, I just mean, when I think you want to run through these and then
Yes. Okay.
dive deep into a few and yeah.
Well, okay. I'll just go over these real quick. So, censorship of critical thinking history, that makes perfect sense for a organization that wants a non-critical thinking population of young kids getting pregnant earlier, being forced to take these jobs earlier that are low paying so that they're uncritical thinking. That is really what they're trying to develop. Science curriculum politicized. They're already doing that. They did it in the first administration where they were telling their scientists that we don't want that result, we want this result. So go
Yeah.
back and do it. And then they were finding people who would do it, right?
Yeah.
One thing that we've learned is that money is a great motivator for some people. Some people will sell out anyone for dollars, and we're seeing that to be the case. No standards for teachers' qualifications, a decline in early childhood education. Programs like Head Start would be eliminated, right? We'd have larger class sizes, reduce access to STEM and advanced courses. they are really trying to dumb down the future generations. I don't see any other way to describe that.
And I mean, yeah, I I think we used to be able to believe that it was simply that they just didn't want to pay their taxes, but I I mean, it goes farther. The idea that we would have an educated population is dangerous for them
Right.
because then people care and then people have higher thoughts like, hey, you should be paying your taxes.
Right. You should be paying more for that. You got the benefit of that. I mean, because
Yeah,
the natural conclusion is if they pay less taxes, there's less tax money available for other services, right? So
yeah,
who is that going to affect? It's going to affect people who are getting those benefits. I personally have no problem with people being on disability if it's legitimate or needing assistance because I've needed assistance in the past where I was going through a personal financial crisis and it was good to get some assistance, but I didn't need it for long as it was there to help out people in need. I have
yeah,
no problem with that. These people don't want you having anything,
yeah,
and I don't get that. I don't get that heartlessness. So, did you want
yeah.
to go back to the patriotic education?
Yeah, I mean, talking about education, and if you wanted to show that graphic I made too,
Okay, let
um,
me pull it up.
there's this there's this idea that
Which one is it, Ellie?
yeah, scroll down. Scroll down farther. I called someone a Nazi. Scroll down farther. Actually, click. Oh, go over to your right. Sorry, and down one. That that line, the red line with the beige
This one,
background. Click on. No, go up. Up
right
one.
here.
Down. That one, yeah. So we have this idea that federal education spending started with Jimmy Carter. We have this idea that Jimmy Carter started the Department of Education, and that is simply not true at all. Just kind of a brief history of education funding. It it actually we have been paying federally. We've been paying for K through 12 education money since the beginning of this country, and late 1700s, we were giving money to states for agricultural education. Throughout the 1800s, we were giving money to states for technical education around home economics, engineering. So we have always provided federal education money. Uh, and, things got more expensive over time. This is inflation adjusted, but even adjusted for inflation, like
Mm-hmm.
you're looking at, oh, we didn't provide benefits to teachers before, we didn't educate students, and so that's one of the biggest things. What you can see is with LBJ, that first jump, that was the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and that was the first instance of providing Title I money for low income schools because we saw this just massive disparity between these, suburban, well off, mostly white schools, and these other schools, and so we passed this act. We provided extra funding to schools that had significant populations of people in poverty, and under under Ford, he passed what was at the time the All Handicapped Children Act in
Mm-hmm.
1975, um, and that was really the first time children with special needs were accommodated in K through 12 education. So the majority of this growth that you see is prior to that 1975 act. Kids who had disabilities were either in state institutions and usually not receiving an education, or they were kept home. They were not welcome in the classroom. A few places around the country had special education services. A few schools, there was a small smattering of them, so I can't say there were no special needs children in schools. But for the most part, K through 12 education in the US fully excluded any kids with special needs. And so when you see this increase in per student spending that starts around that time, uh, the reason for that is because we started providing an education to these kids and it is more expensive.
Okay.
And, it should be like,
Should be.
That's the expectation. And so that 1975 act guaranteed children a fair and equal education. It was really the start of IEPs. Um, and Ford signed it with this knowledge that, like, it wasn't really going to be fully funded. And there's this idea that a lot of people have that from from people who work in special education, especially in school activists, and they say that act was signed with the promise that the federal government would fund 40% of all special education in the US. That's a number that gets dropped a lot by education activists. 40% of special education was supposed to be funded by the federal government. And even on the right today, you have a lot of people who are like, look, I want K through 12 education. I want special education, but clearly the system is corrupt and broken and terrible because they're not paying this 40% that we were promised in 1975. And I got into it with a gal the other day, and I knew that the actual law was up to 40%. Like, she was saying, and most education activists say this was signed with the promise that we got 40% for these kids. And I knew it was probably up to 40%. But I actually looked at the law, um, and what was actually promised in 1975 was 40% of the per pupil cost in US K through 12 education that year per student with a disability. So if not just federal spending, if the average, per student cost was $20,000, it's not, it's significantly lower than that. But if the average per student cost was $20,000, they're supposed to provide up to $8,000 per student. So, we see per student costs uh, kind of raising, or uh you know
Hmm.
they were pretty much their highest in like 2012, 2013, 14, and this one is just federal spending. But that misinformation led people to vote for Trump. They led people to say, we're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, restart the whole system. And like, it's not perfect, but they are providing that money. And if you go look at this education statistic data that they want to take down, you see that a lot of schools are getting that 40% of their budget, especially ones that have, you know, mostly special education students. Like, they're sometimes getting more than 40% of their budget from the federal government, but people just misunderstand what that law actually was. And I mean, there are members of Congress that are passing bills saying, fully fund special education, fully fund the 40% that was promised. And I really have to wonder, like, did they actually read the 1975 bill? Because the 1975 bill didn't say they'd cover 40%. It said they would, it was a dollar value formula, whatever average US K through 12 education spending was, they were going to pay you 40% of that per kid. And that's basically what they're doing for lower income schools. For higher income ones, they're not paying as much. But that jump really that you see is, we're educating special education kids. And it falls down during Reagan, and then goes up again. And like, it's crazy that that biggest increase is George W. Bush. Like, that's that's who saw this federal spending increase the most, apart from, the Great Recession 2008 money that Obama gave. Like, that was a kind of a one-off thing. But what you see from George W. Bush is this massive increase in spending. Uh, and he got rid of a lot of programs too. Like, there was little pet projects that he had, but like, that um that 1975 bill added special education students, and the growth over time is really because if you had a 12-year-old that was staying at home and had, nonverbal autism, um, and you passed a law saying that kid could get an education, they're pretty well established at home. So a lot of parents didn't send them. And so you see this kind of delay in more and more children going into K through 12 school. And then under Bill Clinton, when they passed IDEA, that explicitly included children with autism who hadn't really been included prior to that. And if you don't have like, a stated known diagnosis, you don't really qualify for an IEP. So a lot of these kids with significant learning disabilities or things like autism were still written out of the law until then. And so now going into the 2000s, like you have so many children who are fully included in school. And when you look at those education statistics, you can go, wow, in 1960, 20% of kids weren't going to school. And now we have at least captured in the data 100% of children. Like all children are enrolled in school, homeschooled, or in a private school. And and we have that now in a way that we didn't before because these kids were excluded. What they're fighting against with the Department of Education closure is excluding these children again because states will not be able to afford it. And red states who
Won't do
have
it anyhow.
higher, yeah, red states who have higher rates of IEPs, like red states consistently have that. And they are going to have students who have more needs. And yeah, I mean, the result of this is going to be state institutions again.
Exactly what it's been. And I'd like to point out also that in the 1960 ranges, that's also when civil rights passed. So part of that would be some equaling out of some of the, you know, the lower income schools that were
Well, and that was a lot of what Title One did.
right.
If you want to, so click out of this one and let's take a look at that. What the Department of Education actually does. It's that circle pie
This
chart.
right here.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, so as you can see, the yellow section that is special education funding. Effectively, it's about like 20 billion per year. Title One grants are about the same amount. That is pretty much all the Department of Education does. And so people have this idea that they are providing curriculum or that they're, directing teachers in what to do. And really, for the most part, what they do is distribute this money. Uh, and they do it lean. I mean, they don't have big overhead on this. They have people who understand the laws and the formulas for who has to get paid better than anyone else, clearly better than anyone on Twitter, because none of them actually seem to know what the Department of Education does. But yeah, there has been at least 6 Supreme Court cases that affirmed that the federal government cannot have a say in K through 12 curriculum. One thing that we do have, and we've historically had since the late 1800s, is civil education. And so we tell people about voting. And that is one of the only things that schools have to teach and actually get money for. So
Hmm.
apart from special education and apart from Title One grants, uh, they the federal government provides, in addition to career and technical education and things like that, money so that children have this civil education and they learn about citizenship and they learn about American history. And that is pretty much the only like curriculum requirement that they have. And it's so broad that the Supreme Court has said it's fine to say, yes, you have to teach kids about this. But you have to fund that mandate. And so the federal government provides funding. If you got American history textbooks at school, they were very likely funded by this. And then the other part of that funding is career and technical education, which actually George W. Bush dropped. So a lot of people ask, why aren't there shop classes in schools anymore? Like why don't we have wood shop? Why isn't there metalworking? Like where's home ec gone? And most of those things went away during George W. Bush's administration. And he was on the record saying that those classes were a dumping ground for poor students. Um, and I mean, this is the era of saying like we're getting rid of these and just learn to code, like go to college. And so it's interesting. I think the Democrats get a lot of blame for not having these really hands-on classes when the administration that got rid of those was the Republican administration.
But that all
And
gets back to the whole discussion of all they do is lie. They're a
yeah,
propaganda outlet, and that's a that's another issue, but it's a big one because they'll
yeah,
say anything and do anything, and they have nobody can hold them accountable because they're not going to get called out on the right wing media.
yeah. And yeah, I mean, but and people don't know. Like we didn't do a good job before this telling people how these things work. And if you know, even if you have kids in the system, but if you don't have kids in the system, like you really don't know what schools are like. You just get these ideas from social media that is really, you know, it presents itself as some random person's video or whatever, but like most of these influencers have production companies. It's not random. But yeah, I mean you can take a look and you can see the other things too, like the higher education, adult education is in there, but also it's impact aids, it's disaster recovery money, it's a little bit of money to innovation, to, you know, educational research. And then that last one is the Office of Civil Rights, which is exactly what you're talking about. So if you get rid of the Department of Education, the law still exists that special needs children have a right to a fair and appropriate education, but there's the only way you can get that if the school's not providing it is to sue. And what the Office of Civil Rights does is
Right.
it, you know, it basically it takes on that for you, because I don't know any parent with special needs children who can afford to pay lawyers to take on the district and the state. So the Department of Education gives money for Title One, it distributes it, it gives money for special education, and it ensures that children have a right to that special education, because without that civil rights office, there would be no way to enforce it. It could be the law and it just wouldn't matter because no parent has the means to go after this. And the thing I see online from bots and trolls is people saying, of course there's going to be some lawyer that's going to pro bono take over this case. No, there's not. There
No, there's
will
not.
not be. And this idea that, you know, the private market will simply give charitably to cover all of these things is ludicrous.
you know, let's go move on to USAID. Do you mind if I
Yeah,
grab this image later on and put it in with the materials I have
go
already?
for it. Yeah, happy to.
All right, let's move on to USAID. And for those who were looking, I will provide a how do I how do I get to that? I will provide a link to this document because I have some other ones here. We're not going to cover them because I want to move on to the other topic. But as you see here, other major consequences. So just go through that. There'll be a link in the show notes later on. And here is the notes that I use to prepare all this information, as well as resources, links, URLs to the articles that help me get there. So that's all available to you. I'll provide the URL later on, but let's move on to. Um,
USAID, yeah.
is there one you want me to look at in particular?
Oh, not really. It's mostly just that they're lying over and over and over. Uh, well, yeah, and that's an important thing to talk about. So I have a thread on there that talks about PEPFAR. Scroll down a little bit. Oh, scroll down more. Scroll down more. Scroll down more.
Heat of
And
steel. Ugh. Heat is a nightmare.
oh, go up. Up a little more. Oh, go down. All right.
That's all right.
All right. We're on it today. Scroll down more. I've become a little bit of a troll in my shadow band. That one, ending PEPFAR. So this is one of those things where I think people are missing a lot. So USAID, you know, they officially, I mean, they cut the funding. They said they cut it. The bots and the trolls online keep using the word audit. The federal government did not use the word audit. Elon Musk did not use the word audit. Elon Musk used the word delete. Elon Musk used wood chipper. Elon Musk used lots of gun emojis in references to what happened with USAID. So the idea that it is a pause or an audit is misinformation. And they lie. And it is shocking to me, truly shocking, the number of people in my life who say, but they said this. Yes, they said this, and they said something else, and they did something else. And so when we listen to someone, we really have to listen in context. And the context for this thing with USAID, it was not it wasn't an oversight that PEPFAR is the largest program in USAID. Like the most money of any USAID program, the most services goes to PEPFAR. This was part of Project 2025. This was part of Heritage Foundation. Um, yeah, Bethany Cosma was the Project 2025 facilitator and contributor. If you saw those videos from Publica where they leaked
The
the
training videos.
training videos,
Hmm.
yeah. So Bethany Cosma is facilitating several of those training videos, and she was the deputy chief of staff to USAID during Trump's first term. She believes PEPFAR promotes the sexualization of children. She says this over and over and over. She believes that PEPFAR funds comprehensive sexual education and all these things. And there are financial carve-outs to prevent the spread of HIV. That's true. But 99% of what PEPFAR does is it's providing these HIV medications so that people do not succumb to AIDS and do not transmit it. And it's the largest thing we do. It's the best thing we do. It was a George W. Bush program that at the time, and I may have screenshotted it in there, but you can go back and Heritage Foundation was writing in 2003 about the problem that they had with PEPFAR. And yeah, they wanted to gut the program. And I think the difference between what the Trump administration is doing this time and what the Trump administration is doing last time is last time they tried to do everything under the table. They didn't want you to see it. They didn't want you to know about it. And and so people would find these things and it was like the Streisand effect. Like the thing we found that we thought you were trying to hide became the really big deal and the scandal of the week. And instead, the method this time is just to lie over and over and over again. And so last time they did try to cut PEPFAR. Like this is not an oversight where Elon Musk cut USAID and didn't know that they did this great thing. Like this was the purpose. Cutting PEPFAR was the point of cutting USAID. They don't want this program. And and we just I think there's so many things going on and the narrative is Musk doesn't know what he's doing. And he in a lot of ways he doesn't, but this part was intentional. Um so yeah, they in 2017, 2018, like when Trump issued his budget, he issued money for PEPFAR and he cut it a quarter. And they said, continue this great funding for this program, but they cut 25% of it. And, that you have a certain amount of overhead, you have a certain amount of staff you have to pay for these things. So that is going to cut more than 25% of the medications that you're able to distribute. And and it was, shocking and bad and people sued and so we did all this then, but people just kind of forgot that. And so there really is this narrative going that like, oh, they don't know what they're doing and or people will say, I guess they don't know what they're doing. I guess they don't know how important PEPFAR is to reducing the global burden of HIV. And I really think we need to stop talking like that. Like I really think we need to stop using I guess they don't know as like a rhetorical way to get people to think about whether or not they actually know. Like, no, they know. They tried to do this before. It was the point.
It was
They do know what
intentional.
they're doing.
Well, you're not a conspiracy theorist like I can be. I'm going to tell you. I'm going to. So I know you like data. I'm okay with being in the nuance side of things, but don't also forget that China and Russia are all excited that we're getting rid of USAID because it allows them to do some of the things that are helpful and has this soft political power. For example, China's got its Belt and Trade Initiative, which is to help people. So now they're going to be
Yeah.
able to step in here and help these people in need, do goodwill, and we're going to be further isolating ourselves. And do you think that's a coincidence that Elon Musk is here doing it to help China, who is helping him with his Tesla factories in China? I think it's all related.
So, the Council for National Policy is the umbrella organization for Heritage Foundation, for Right to Life movement, for the NRA, for every single one of these conservative movements
Mhm.
uh, are kind of under Council for National Policy. And Elon Musk has been going to their meetings since last March, and in every single one of them, they sing his praises and they publish the speeches. I mean, they're kind of hard to find, and I think they really pride themselves in being this like super secretive organization, but their stuff is not that difficult to access. And yeah, they have been singing Elon's praises for a year, and they've been talking about, he's not a believer, but he understands this need, and I'm like, this is absolutely coordinated. Like, this is not, oh, Heritage is doing this bad thing, the Project 2025 people are doing this bad thing, and then Elon has these like ulterior goals. And I mean, he may have his own initiatives in this, but no, he is actively engaging every single one of these steps that Heritage lined up for him.
Uh,
You
uh,
know, this is not, it's not random. It's Elon is doing the work of Project 2025 while he's shitposting online and acting like it's this big chaotic mess. And
and lying
just
about everything.
again, we have reached 100% saturation with the lies. And I am in the shadow ban on Twitter now, uh, because I called it out, and that there's that Data Republican user who what they did, and they left the ChatGPT conversation in the code. And like, no offense to anyone who uses ChatGPT, and if I'm doing something that I need like repeated, I will too. But they pulled all of the USAspending.gov data, which is a public database, and we've had it for 10 years. So there's all these people going, look at this new thing we've discovered. It's on USAspending.gov. It's been there for 10 years.
Mhm.
We've been able to track this for a really long time. And he all he did was download the data file for like the whole website, and then didn't really know what he was doing. There's actually an API where you could have just like gone straight from the website and used it. And like, they have tutorial videos that are really easy to use. And I still don't understand why they didn't do that. But they used ChatGPT, they downloaded the whole data file, which is really, really big, and they made this website with these flow charts that stick together and say, look at this spending. And it's like one of those, cop drama trying to find the serial killer thing, where they're like, look, this money goes here, and this money goes here, and this money goes here. And it's totally fake. The whole thing is fake. And what it does is it removes the context of usaspending.gov, because like, I don't know if you heard the one about $34,000 for trans comics in
Mm.
Peru. Um, and what that was a Fulbright scholarship, which is like it was a student Fulbright scholarship. So it was an undergraduate student who got this $35,000 scholarship, and Peru gave one to one of our kids too, to go to Peru, do a foreign exchange student program, and then make a project at the end. And that's pretty standard. And
Yeah.
it makes sense that the State Department covers a few of these. And them, like, they as a trans person made a comic about LGBTQ identity in Peru as their like final project after they did their foreign exchange program. That's totally fine. That kid absolutely has a right for that to be their final project. That was not $35,000 on a, a trans comic in Peru. That was a foreign exchange program. And the kid did their senior project as a comic book, and that's neat. That's cool. That's fine. Like, but for, the White House press secretary to make a claim that this was $35,000 for this trans comic in Peru, or the situation with Gaza, where like, yes,
Yep.
PEPFAR actually is involved in Gaza, Mozambique,
Mhm.
the province of Gaza in Mozambique. It was a different Gaza. Uh, and that was this data Republican, new Twitter user that Elon Musk is in love with, which is when those block you, you get in trouble, as I'm learning. I didn't even do anything, and it was funny. He he blocked me, and he told me he blocked me, like, in a comment and was like, said I was stupid or whatever and said he was blocking me because I didn't know anything, and even a bunch of his followers went, "Hey, that's really uncool to just, like, block somebody who is
Calls
pointing
you
out
out.
different information." Yeah, um, but yeah, so the other one was and that was the source of the Gaza situation where they were saying there's, millions of dollars going to condoms in Gaza. Well, no. There's a program that's paying for sexual and reproductive health in Gaza, and what that means for Gazans, if you know anything about that culture, like, no, they are not going through millions of dollars worth of condoms. They're delivering babies, and there are receipts for this. You can if you're using usaspending.gov, you can look at the organization that the money went to and you can look at the services provided and you can see, oh, yes, sexual and reproductive health in this context means delivering babies. I mean, literally saving women's lives, like the most, valid, a- across the spectrum, valuable humanitarian situation is to have midwives in this war torn area delivering babies, and that's what they were doing. Like, every single thing Musk and the White House are saying at this point is a
Right.
lie. And you don't even need to scratch the surface, it's a lie.
I just, and we could probably have a 20-hour discussion about what to do about that. But I think part of it is all based about we need to start calling it out. We need to name it in advance. Say, here's what they're going to do. They're going to spread some lies. Here's what they do, and just sort of name what they're doing because trying to keep up with all their lies and fact check is nearly impossible. They just
And
lie
yeah,
about
I
everything.
mean, I'm at the point where I'm gonna, I keep my my Twitter life and my Facebook with my actual friends and family pretty separate, but I'm at the point where I'm just gonna start, like, every single post needs to, you need to know the saturation of lies at this point. Like, I think it's hard for people to grasp that it's all of it, but I think you're right. I mean, if we could make people realize that, m- even if they don't agree that all of it is a lie, they're going to nitpick some of it. They're going to say, well, that's a matter of opinion or that's conjecture or whatever. But to see that most of it is a lie, and
Right.
and I believe all of it is a lie, but it's like, you know misstated versus just a flat out lie. And the
It's
condoms in
intentional.
Gaza thing is a lie. The trans comic book thing is a lie. There's not a little bit of truth in that.
No, that's I did during the California fires when you had done that good reporting about that. I was sort of documenting, not necessarily the day to day actions, but I was documenting what the Republicans and conservatives were doing. Just how that Trump would come out and say something that was a lie, then it would be amplified by all their propagandists and their liars. Then it would force the media to get out there and report on the lies, and then it'd have to get Democrats to respond to the lies, and then it was just driving the narrative. So there was so
Yeah.
much disinformation that being forced to respond to that Governor Newsom had to do a website to sort of address that. But even that is reactionary. But I
Yeah.
think that what became very helpful for others that were trying to downplay is that we were able to document what they were doing. I said, and the next time that
Yeah.
there's any kind of crisis, expect this to happen. Expect there to be another. They're eating dogs and cats, and now amplify that. And then we're going to amplify that. We're going to get enraged about that, and then we're going to
Yeah.
force the media to cover it, and then we're going to make Democrats respond to it, and then we're going
And
to blame the DEI and blah 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 blah.
I think they both know and have kind of intentionally caused, this r- real, like, illiteracy even among the media. I mean, they don't know. I had when the stuff about the CDC came out, I told you, most of my followers on X are reporters, and so I was being asked for background. Like, the CDC could not respond to them and tell them what these funding cuts meant or what services should be provided that weren't. And so they were reaching out to me because everyone else was sequestered, and I was giving background, I think, to 4 or 5 different outlets that week on, like, what was happening. And because the media doesn't know either, and a lot of the times they don't know to ask if they're seeing, oh, you know CNN reported it this way, or even the New York Times reported it this way. They're going to report it the same way. They're not going to go look for the information. And so that's how you have the situation in Ohio, and that's how you have the situation with the fires, and they just don't go look for it. And I think that I think in some ways the tide was starting to turn on that. Like I was getting more requests for information, and I was seeing a little bit more due diligence. But then having the Trump administration and having these media outlets that really exist basically just to support him at this point, and the lawsuits that are getting paid out. I mean, they're not like they're they're just gonna say whatever makes him look good and whatever they're told to say. So
We're at the hour one, but I just want to close out with just your comments, your thoughts. I saw this post recently, and I don't know. I'm not you, so I'm not a superstar at deciphering what was true, but it made sense intuitively. So there's this guy who's got a website or a profile. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he was trying to educate people about a ongoing medical outbreak in Indiana. I think it was, and
are you talking about the TB in Kansas
no,
or
it was Indiana.
measles?
There was another outbreak of people being in reporting to the hospitals. They have all these extra cots and stuff outside, like we did during the COVID time. These people are
Yeah.
coming to the hospital with flu-like symptoms, with respirator needs, just like the
Hmm.
COVID situation. And his comment was that we I'm hearing about it from my friend who works at the hospital, and then later I saw in that whole chat line was people proving that it was actually going on with local reporting and pictures and images and videos, etc. And that got me thinking. Trump shut down the entire CDC. The reason we don't know about any of this stuff is because nobody's allowed to report to the CDC is not allowed to report. So we're just running around completely blind. So I don't
Well,
know if
so
this guy's legit or not, but I could see that the issue in Indiana was growing and that
yeah.
nobody knows about it because nobody can talk about it.
So I will say at this point for public health departments, we do have some challenges. We have to remove content from our websites that was linked to the CDC because those are dead links now. And at some point, we are concerned that we're going to have to make some changes based on the federal funding. We get very, very little. I mean, like we have a nurse family partnership appropriation that's been the same dollar value since 1995 because they don't like make it go up. We get very little federal funding. Um, but there are some concerns about what we may have to change at the state level. But like you should, I think most people know, get my information from the CDC. That's changed now. You need to get your information from the state health department of whatever state you live in. Like you need to bookmark their website. You need to sign up for their news alerts, because at this point they're still reporting correctly. There are some concerns about capacity, like whether or not states have capacity to handle outbreaks. But like what you're telling me right now about these outbreaks, I'm not seeing in front of me on the Indiana state health department website, like I think that's one of the concerns about the CDC not being able to communicate, is that they can't communicate if there's bad information coming out too. So it kind of reminds me of like the drone situation where like maybe there were some drones, but like 99.9% of everything everybody saw was actually like airplanes. And like every single one they pointed out was airplanes. Um and so, like, now we're in a position and we're in an information vacuum where if state health departments are not getting ahead of this potentially misinformation or correct information, but I, you then have mass panic, really, because like the Indiana State Health Department does not have the capacity to issue national releases on anything. They can't quell fear like the CDC could by saying like, oh, actually, this is a whooping cough outbreak, which is bad, but it's not uncommon this time of year. And we have a few of those that are going on, but like now you have you have this information vacuum where someone can say there's these terrible things going, or there's, person
Yeah.
to person transmission of bird flu, which there's not yet, but someone could be saying that, and the CDC is not able to respond. And even if they did, now we don't trust them. So
And I think, and we'll sort of close with this. I won't. We want to definitely keep it to the hour, but I think that it's also true that some of these state departments we can't even trust. Like I wouldn't trust a word coming out of Florida or Texas. Not a single word coming from their health
I,
departments. That's
I
me personally.
right. And so I work for a health department. Um, so I know how that data is gathered, and I know how it's presented. And at this point, like professionally, um, I I don't have a problem trusting state health departments and county health departments, because that's part of that's part of why COVID misinformation became so bad. Is people have this idea that and I'm not saying you do, but a lot of people had this idea that these COVID numbers weren't reliable because, like, the CDC under the Trump administration was just coming up with them. But the reality is, every single one of those numbers is uploaded by a county health department. And those county health departments give them to the state, and the state gives them to the CDC. And I can personally go back in to the CDC website or the state website and look at my own county's information, and know that that's accurate. Like, I counted that number, I put that number in the system, that number is reported on the state website, and it's reported on the CDC website. Like, I know that this number is accurate. For that number to be inaccurate, apart from like a messed up data reporting where somebody added a zero or something, for that number to be inaccurate would require i- a lot of people in on a conspiracy. And I'm for the conspiracies sometimes. I absolutely think there's a lot of people acting in bad faith, but what that would require would be blue county, very blue county epidemiologists putting in bad information or not speaking up about the bad information. And you will see that. Like, it is these people's entire life's work. And if they see something like the Trump administration messing with their numbers, they will go to the news.
But I'm thinking more.
Absolutely.
I'm thinking more like Latipo, that Surgeon General of Florida. I can see him in a staff meeting with the county director, saying we need those numbers to be down. I
So Florida is
I can totally see that.
constitutionally, Florida's a home rule state with their health departments. So they're they can't do that. Like, it's it's hard to explain, but like those county health departments, thankful for this one very Florida thing where they are home rule health departments. Those county health departments have police powers over their counties. They have ultimate authority over their counties. If they want to do a vaccine campaign, they do a vaccine campaign. If they want to quarantine, they want to quarantine. And that is up to the individual counties. So Florida Surgeon General, like Florida health officials, do not have the authority over the counties. So I just want to, and I mean, this is exactly why we're talking, like, this kind of information where you know what you can trust and how you can trust it, and you can trust at this point the data that is coming out of these health departments. Because again, if it Miami-Dade County is going to submit the data from their local hospitals. That local hospital knows how many cases they had. They're going to see that data on the public Miami-Dade dashboard. That public Miami-Dade dashboard is then going to be reported on the state dashboard. For there to be misinformation in that, uh, would really require a lot of people, and like you're not going to have that that's it's like this whole other level of corruption where, like, you would have to have multiple health hospitals involved, multiple health systems, multiple counties. So I absolutely think, they can make that data harder to find. They can make that data behind multiple walls. They can be slow in reporting that data. Like, there are ways that they can prevent that. If you're noticing, oh, this illness data used to be same day or 48 hours later, and the website hasn't been updated in a month, like, that's the kind of thing that they can do to prevent you from having that knowledge. And at that point, we should start getting concerned. But the actual numbers, if they are up to date, are very, very trustworthy, and I really want to
I
affirm
I I trust you. I do not trust
that.
Florida. So with that, I will take it and say, okay, I will give some credence to them, but with
Like,
a side eye because I don't
it's
trust them.
it's one of those things where we're in this position because, and I so agree with you on it. But we're in this position because we're a low trust society right now. Like, and that is the damage of Trump. Trump makes us a low trust society, and we have to really kind of get outside of our heads to really logically think through, like, what information can I trust? What can I know is accurate information? How do I know it's accurate information? And like, how could they prevent me from accessing it? Like, those slowing down the data or making it less accessible. Uh, but like, we really have to resist the low trust society. I mean, this is what they're saying about all these federal employees, that, like, let me tell you, nobody nobody knows CDC funding, CDC protocols. Nobody knows about special education laws and fundings and IEP regulations and what schools actually have to provide, like the federal workforce. Like, they are the most informed people on that, more than any politician, more than any pundit, more than any media person. Like, pretty much all of them are wrong, but the people who are actually doing this work do know. Um, and
Trump's trying to get rid of all of the expertise to be
and
put
Trump's
on
trying to
the
get
internet.
rid of all of them. And so we can't respond to that by not having faith in that same kind of work other places. Like, again, there
Well,
are ways they can prevent you from getting their
I
data.
will accept your admonition. I'll take it. But I've always been clear with you that I have major trust issues with conservatives. They just have
I do too. And it's not the conservatives that are epidemiologists in Florida. Those are not conservatives. They are not working as epidemiologists in Florida. They can't find any. Once you start getting to that level of education in sciences, there are not these kind of conservatives, which is, I mean, honestly, I think that's why the CDC is not responding to things, is because every other agency has found, like, someone who's an expert who's kind of ideologically aligned. Like, you can find kind of conservative people in the Department of Education, or, all these other things. You can't in the CDC. Nobody who works in the CDC is going to give you, your desired ideological
hold on.
responses about things.
How about Miss Burke from last session? She was pretty accepting of the lies that Trump was spewing. She didn't step out there. It was Fauci had to
Oh,
clean up
yeah.
her stuff. She was a
Well,
disgrace.
and
Deborah
that's
Brooks, I think her name was.
I again, like, you can find a person.
Right, right.
You can find people in leadership, like, because those are effectively their political appointees. Like, I mean, even if they're not in political positions, like, these leadership roles are often selected reality, based on their connections and who they know. And that's a concern. We should take that into account. I mean, when we talk about the fire chief who was like, yeah, it was, a $18 million, $17 million budget cut, like, there are other reasons she responded that way that were different from the
Right.
reality of the data. Like, there were other things going on there. And you have the ability and the logical skills to, like, think through, like, oh, I wouldn't want to be blamed for the most expensive houses in the country burning down either. Um,
No.
and that, kind of softly acknowledging to the media, yeah, it was $17 million budget cut, is, like, so very different than, like, preventing people from, like, having access to this information, which like, yeah, I mean, I think that they're doing that. They're absolutely preventing people from having access to this information, which is why the number one thing you can do is find your state, find your local and county health departments and follow them, because the people in those counties are going to give you the best data, and you have a lot of them. I mean, it's like Wikipedia, it's good because it has so many people checking it.
Yeah, I'm in California, so I'm feeling pretty confident that we're going to get good data here.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
I don't feel so bad. Anyway, I don't want to hold you up any longer. But
No
before we leave,
worries.
I'd like to ask you. We didn't cover them all because there's so many of them. What are the top three other executive orders that we would cover if we had more time today. What would you want to talk about?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I probably would want to just dive more into the uh, education, and that patriotic stuff. Like, he has absolutely no authority to establish anything like a national curriculum. That's been proven by the Supreme Court. Most of these executive orders are simply to
To test.
test executive power. Um, and then the other one being, I don't think people realize how much he ran his platform on killing immigrants. What's happening in Guantanamo Bay, the idea that we would put 30,000 immigrants there, uh, you have to hear what these people say in context, and you have to hear them clarify their terms. Project 2025 was really, really clear in multiple places that their goal is to overturn Kennedy v. Louisiana. And I mean, I have it in front of me. They're enforce the death penalty where appropriate and applicable. Capital punishment is a sensitive matter, as it should be, but the current crime wave makes deterrence vital at the federal, state, and local levels. However, providing this punishment without ever enforcing it provides justice neither to the victims or the defendant. They say the next conservative administration should therefore do everything possible to obtain finality for the 44 prisoners on death row. It should also pursue the death penalty for applicable crimes, particularly heinous crimes involving violence or sexual abuse of children, until Congress says otherwise through legislation. So they should pursue expanding the death penalty until Congress says otherwise. And the footnote on this says this would require seeking the Supreme Court to overrule Kennedy v. Louisiana, which is the Supreme Court ruling that says you you cannot have capital punishment, you cannot have the death penalty for a crime that didn't involve a homicide. Manslaughter is not enough, maimed is not enough. Intentional murder is the bar for capital punishment. Intentional murder is the bar for the death penalty. You cannot have it below it. And that's what Kennedy v. Louisiana said. They explicitly say they want to overrule Kennedy v. Louisiana to expand the death penalty. Trump's Agenda 47 on his website says we also need the death penalty for drug dealers. He said he would add human traffickers, drug dealers, and human traffickers. They get the death penalty swiftly. Watch it stop quickly. He's issued 2 executive orders now, both changing the qualifications for the death penalty. One saying the Department of Justice will seek the death penalty as appropriate punishment for heinous crimes against humanity, including those who kill law enforcement officers and illegal immigrants who maim and murder Americans. The definition of maim is inflict serious bodily injury that is overstepping what the constitutional grounds for the death penalty are. So he is saying he is going to expand the death penalty to violent crime for immigrants specifically.
There's a state also that has enacted or proposed a bill recently that would give life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for any immigrants they find. I think it was Louisiana.
Yeah.
Like, so you
So,
want to lock them up forever for looking for a better place so that you can use them for your free slave labor.
yep. And another one of the executive orders is seeking the overruling of the Supreme Court precedents that hinder capital punishment. The Attorney General shall take all appropriate action to seek overruling of Supreme Court precedents that limit the authority of state and federal governments to impose capital punishment. Um, in addition to pursuing the death penalty where possible, the Attorney General shall pursue federal jurisdiction and seek the death penalty, regardless of other factors, for every federal crime involving the murder of a law enforcement or a capital crime committed by an alien illegally present in the country. And if you say a capital crime for an alien and you have just redefined several sentences before and said a capital crime is maiming, not murdering. For right now, a capital crime means murder. He's changing it. And so people see this and they go, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Well, no, like he's redefining the terms as he's saying it. So,
Mm.
and I mean, you can go on my X if you want to and see it, but, like, there is I I made a square that was, like, the 800,000 square feet, and that is the size of 30,000 twin beds all pushed together with no room in between them, and that is fewer square feet per person than Auschwitz. The
Wow.
available space in Guantanamo Bay, like, there are 6,000 US soldiers that live there. The migrant center that they have usually houses about 20 people. It has a capacity of 120. The prison has a capacity of 700. There is only one spot of usable land because everything else is, like, really, 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 really steep in the bay, and the only spot of usable land is that 800,000 square feet spot. This would be a concentration camp. Sending immigrants here while they are explicitly saying they want to pursue the death penalty for any violent crimes. Like, they are they are setting the precedent for a concentration camp. That is terrifying. And there's all these other things that really directly affect us, and so I think those are easier for us to comprehend, and this idea that our government is clearly, intentionally, and a little tongue in cheek so that you question whether or not it's real, setting a precedent for concentration camps. Uh,
Yeah.
I
I,
mean,
I don't suffer from a failure of imagination. I believe these people are evil and that they'll do all that they're saying they will do. I believe that.
yeah, and and I do too, and for us to be in a position to where, Marco Rubio is saying that he's having conversations with the president of El Salvador about holding US prisoners there and, like, paying for US prisoners to be there. I mean, this is not this isn't Trump's first term, like, this isn't anything we've ever seen in America, and I don't know how to sound the alarm bells for people. Like, this is explicit, this is clear, this is in every single document they've published. It was Project 2025, it is Agenda 47 on Trump's website, verbatim. It is now 2 executive orders, and they have already started sending people to Guantanamo Bay. The New York Times just posted pictures of the camps that they're creating. This is going to be a humanitarian situation that is worse than Auschwitz. This the
Yep.
it, at Auschwitz, the it was a little over 30 square feet per person, and this is going to be under 25 feet per person. If they do what they say they are doing, maybe some of it's bluster, but
No, I
what
don't.
is that? I don't think it is either. And even if it is, even if it was just bluster, like, what is the
Have
reality?
you seen Homan? Have you ever seen that evil person talk? I mean,
Yeah.
doesn't he just look like he personifies evilness?
How are they all supervillains? I mean, I mean, not even supervillains, but just villains, like Stephen Miller. I can't take him seriously because I keep thinking I'm watching a movie and they cast him as the villain because there is no one more evil or villainous.
He's got a whole thing. But we better wrap up.
Yeah.
You and I could
Yeah.
talk all day long, but I wanted to have this conversation with you, and maybe we can talk again real soon about
Yeah.
other things that are popping up because I think keeping people informed, letting them know that people are talking and thinking about things, I think helps people. So if
Yeah.
you're open to it, I'd love to definitely have you on and talk again, and we'll
Happy to.
definitely focus on keeping it to the hour.
Yeah. No problem.
But both you and I love to chat, so we know how that can go. And
Yeah.
for you,
This was fun
it
and
was. Thank
sad.
you for that. And thank you guys for joining us. I did not look to see if there's any comments, but most of our comments come after the fact. But I do appreciate your time,
Oh, yeah.
Ellie, and we will go from there.
Good talking to you.
Bye.
Bye.